The remaining signatories to the Iran nuclear deal say that they will not support U.S. efforts to unilaterally trigger a controversial mechanism in the accord to reimpose sanctions against the Islamic Republic. In a statement, the foreign ministers of the UK, France, and Germany warned the U.S. that triggering a snapback of UN sanctions on Iran will have serious and adverse consequences. The trio said that Washington's move is incompatible with efforts to preserve the deal. Top diplomats, however, stressed lifting UN arms embargo on Tehran, which will end this October under the agreement, will have, quote, major implications, that is, for regional security and stability. Washington says it's drafted a resolution to extend the embargo, but China and Russia say the U.S. has no right to do so. Joining us now for this news review is Gordon Duff, senior editor at Veterans Today, joining us from Michigan, and Jason Unruhe, political commentator, joining us from Niagara Falls, that is Ontario. Gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you both to the program. We'll start with you, Mr. Gordon Duff. Pleasure to have you join us once again on one of these news reviews. And your thoughts on the story, please.
Well, the IAEA has obviously become the same kind of puppet against Syria that the OPCW is on gas and biological warfare against both Syria and Russia. The issue we have is very simple. There was a nuclear agreement under the Obama administration. The United States has abrogated the agreement and blocked the other signatories from following it. The agreement is no longer binding. Iran has chosen to follow the agreement anyway. You know, one of our editors is an IAEA inspector who set up the reporting system and monitoring system in Iraq, and I've spoken to him about this, and he says everything is still there, that all enriched uranium materials that are produced in Iraq are being accounted for 100% still to this day. The IAEA has become and has fallen into that same trap that so many other groups have, especially since what we have seen happen to the International Criminal Court at The Hague when it threatened to investigate the United States and Israel for war crimes.
Duff, I don't mean to cut you off. I want, if we can, try to focus a little bit more, closely on the UK, France, and Germany. They're trying to supposedly stand up in front of Washington right now and say, look, you're not any longer part of this deal, but you're trying to basically trigger the snapback under the deal. And now the trio is saying that Washington's move is incompatible with efforts to preserve the deal. My question to you is, what have the UK, the France, and Germany done to preserve the deal themselves over the last couple of years?
Well, they had attempted to find an alternative way to handle trade under their portion of the original agreement with Iran. They have failed in doing so. They have failed to stand up to the United States for violating the treaty. And now, as it's easier to simply go after Iran, the victim, they're choosing to do that. In football, we call it piling on. Once somebody's on the ground, you might as well land on them. The idea, and we're surprised to some extent that Germany followed around. There has never been any independence on the part of Britain and France at all. And the whole discussion is basically worthless. We've been expecting and hoping, many of us, that Iran would finally choose to develop nuclear weapons, and it's chosen not to do this on its own for its own reasons. But that leverage is obviously needed against the U.S. and others from how we've seen them deal with other nations. Iran has chosen to not do that on their own as policy. They have stayed with this policy now. They're in their 18th year without any agreement. They stayed to this policy. They're continuing to stay to the policy. And the idea that somehow they can be pushed into even going further than necessary, further than anyone. And of course, we have Israel with dozens or hundreds, nobody knows, nuclear weapons a few hundred miles away, and a non-signatory as though they were invisible. So the hypocrisy of this move is overwhelming.
Thank you, Gordon. And I want to welcome to the program, Jason. Always a pleasure to have you on and get your perspective. Your thoughts on the E3 here, always playing the fence. I mean, it's hard to say who actually practice or exercise more honor? The Trump administration by just abruptly saying we don't like the deal, we're out of it, or the E3 by dragging their feet over the last couple of years saying that no, we want to stay part of the deal, but then actually taking no steps to that end?
Well, I think that this is another game of politics in general. Now, see, the European signatories are perfectly okay with the deal staying in place as long as they don't have to do anything. One of the reasons they stood by it was because the United States had promised to do A, B, C during the course of that agreement and didn't really see any reason why they would really steer away from that unless something significant happened. While that significant thing happening is the election of current U.S. President Donald Trump, who has seen fit to sabotage everything that his predecessor had done. And that's what they hadn't been counting on. So now they have to actually do the things that they said they were going to do, but really had no intention of doing so because they didn't think it was actually going to happen. Now they have to carry out all these measures. They have to reorientate things. They got to create the income tax payment system. They have to go through all this, which they don't even want to do. And frankly, I don't think they even really care. There was a nice, comfortable agreement that was set up. They could just go along with it. They wouldn't have to do anything. But now, unfortunately, the reality is very different from that. I think that there is definitely a situation where there was a level of stability inside the agreement, and that's what the European signatories want. They don't want to have to deal with the current conflict because Trump sabotaged the deal. I think what they really want is for the deal to go back so they can stop thinking about it, so they can shove it off to the side and deal with something more important, or at least something more important to them in terms of dealing with the COVID-19 outbreak. So I think that their kind of rebellion against what Trump was saying is basically them sending the specific message. They're tired of dealing with this. They're tired of, to use a kind of phrase, monkey in the middle. They're supposed to do something, but they don't really want to do it. And I think a lot of them see, or maybe they perceive Trump's presidency coming to an end, and that if Joe Biden comes back in, the JCPOA will suddenly return to its normal state of being, and they won't have to deal with it anymore.
And Gordon, do you believe that? Do you believe that the E3 are just trying to wait Donald Trump out and see what happens this November?
I think that's absolutely correct. Trump is a dead man walking in one of two situations. If he loses the election, and even the friendly networks show him 12 points behind now, it'll work into their hands. If he wins the election, the moment after the election, he becomes a dead man walking again. Chances are he will lose the United States Senate with both houses of Congress in the hands of the Democrats, and we don't see how it could be otherwise. He'll be continually embroiled in lawsuits, investigations. Might watch his wife get deported, which people are talking about here now. This country is going to come apart, and the Europeans sitting there waiting for Trump to go away, waiting for, it's not just Trump, it's the United States that's going away. Our ability to bully, our ability to push our will. While all this is going on, we have a side deal here going on in Libya, where the U.S. seems to have bullied Russia into abandoning Haftar. We have a lot of moves involving Turkey and Iran similarly going on. All of these efforts the Europeans are watching. They're staging what they do involved in this nuclear situation with the IAEA. And this very minor move we saw. And as your previous speaker exactly said, our European friends seem to be buying themselves time while the U.S. burns itself to death, and it's certainly happening here.
And thank you, Gordon. And Jason, so how much do you think the November election, should Donald Trump leave office and a Democratic president come into office, how much do you think the E3 tone and commitment to the JCPOA will change at that point?
I think
if at
there'll
all?
definitely be a sudden resurgence of interest in the JCPOA by the European signatories if another Obama-style Democrat does come back into office, because they know they'll return to the original deal and they won't have to deal with the situation anymore. So you're going to see a lot more cooperation. I think that even outside this agreement in general, a return to someone who's frankly just not Donald Trump would create a lot of goodwill with a lot of countries, and maybe a lot of people in the world would be sighing a deal of relief that now they're going to deal with a United States that, while continues to be an empire, would at least be a much more politically stable one in foreign policy, at least. So I think that because of all the trouble that Trump has caused by sabotaging things, putting out false accusations of possessing nuclear weapons, that was given by phony evidence by Israel, etc., that when all that kind of nonsense stops and it returns to some kind of normalcy, the European signatories would be much more inclined to work with the United States on this one.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you both for joining us on the program with your respective perspectives on this. Jason Unruhe joining us out of Niagara Falls, Ontario, and Mr. Gordon Duff there joining us from Michigan. And viewers, that is a wrap for the segment of your Press TV's News Review. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye for now.